quite specialized in implantology and bone regeneration, and also soft tissue management, and also the quality of the implant soft tissues is one of my expertise fields, let's say. So we have many patients like that where we have some bone deficiencies. And next slide, please. What we want to obtain today is that kind of change with a massive bone augmentation here that will allow us to place implants where we want to obtain the best aesthetic outcomes. Next, please. Again, another patient here where you can see that I could have placed implants in this case, but not in the proper position for obtaining the best aesthetic outcomes. And what we will do is a guided bone regeneration, mostly through the sausage technique that, as we call it today, with collagenous membranes that are pinned in the bone and really filled with biomaterial. With some perforations of the cortical plates to promote the vascularization and the possibility of the bone-forming cells to exit the pre-existing bone and invade the biomaterial underneath. So from this patient, from this situation, what we got is the next slide. This is the outcome where you can see that with that kind of hydroxyapatite, we can get a perfect bone augmentation, and this is really living bone. But then, of course, the quality of the biomaterial is very important. And so far, we don't really have the best quality of biomaterial to be sure that the full volume is filled with living bone and not with some fibrous tissue. And that will depend on the quality of the biomaterial that we will place. And we will get back to that in a few minutes. Next slide, please. So this patient has been really augmented with a sausage technique, as I explained, quite an easy technique to manage clinically. And the quality of the biomaterial that we will place under the membrane to create this big sausage is, of course, extremely important for the speed of the bone regeneration, the time for placing the implants, the speed of regeneration, but also for the quality of the regenerated tissue to obtain a maximum of bone and not fibrous tissue. And next slide. And this will allow us to place, so in this case, it's just 6 zirconia implants that were placed. In this case, there was Neodent Xi implants placed in this situation, and you can see the aesthetic outcome that we could obtain thanks to this massive bone augmentation that it could perform with the proper material. Next, please. So, the specifications that we ask for a biomaterial for guided bone regeneration are the following. What I want is to, of course, allow the new bone formation. That is, we need, of course, a biocompatible material, that's for sure. But we also would like to stimulate the new bone formation. And not all materials on the market actually today stimulate the new bone formation. We also want to protect the augmented tissue from resorption. I don't want to create this massive bone augmentation with a sausage technique and have a resorption of this regenerated tissue a few months after or a few years after. This material, this volume, has to remain stable for many, many, many years. And for that, we strongly believe, at least in Europe, it's a very common opinion that we need a non-resorbable or very slowly resorbable material to protect this newly formed tissue from later resorption. And last but not least, what we would like to have is a very high bone to material, to bone to particles contact. We know this bone to implant contact parameter that will measure the osseointegration of dental implants. But when we place a biomaterial like this with for guided bone regeneration, I want a newly formed bone to be in direct touch with each particle of biomaterial. We want to get the highest bone to material contact to have a higher primary stability of our implants, because then we will create kind of a composite of biomaterial and new bone really attached each together. And that's very, very important for us. So stimulating material to go fast, non-resorbable material, and high bone-to-material contact. Next slide, please. At the moment, perhaps the best material existing on the market is the bio-os. I have been, and I'm still a big user of bio-os, and I'm still a bigger user of bio-os just for one reason, is that because the wee bone is not yet available in Europe. So I can use it a lot on animals, but not yet in humans, in Europe, unfortunately. So the bio-os is a very exceptional material because of a very high bone to material contact. This material, this hydroxyapatite on the market so far in Europe, is the best material for obtaining the highest bone to material contact. And that gives a very high primary stability of our implants, because we will create a very dense mineralized composite tissue for placing our implants. And on the right side of the image, and this purple image, histological image, it's actually the wee bone that gives a very high bone to material contact. Next, please. And the fact is that when we have a very high bone to material contact, it means that our material is very osteoconductive. So the osteoconductivity of the material is very high. And that has another advantage, this high bone to material contact, this high osteoconductivity. The other advantage that it is that it will bring the bone further away. And you can see with this, the bio-os here on rabbits, that when you place a nicely osteoconductive material, it really, the newly formed bone can close the gap. When without any material, you cannot close the gap. It's impossible. Next slide, please. Now, unfortunately, not all hydroxyapatites on the market have obtained or will give you the same bone to material contact. For instance, this is from the PhD thesis of France Lambert, who is now also professor of periodontology and dental surgery in our university in Belgium. She was a student of mine at that time, and in her PhD thesis, she compare the bone to material contact obtained with various biomaterials and various hydroxyapatites. And here we have two hydroxyapatites, pure hydroxyapatites, bio-os and osbone. Osbone is a synthetic hydroxyapatite. And you can see with bio-os, she obtained 65% of bone to material contact. Instead, and on the other side, we only have 38% with osbone. Why is that? Why do not all hydroxyapatites have the same osteoconductive potential? Next slide. We have to think at dental implants. It's not a problem of porosity, it's a problem of topography, of surface roughness. We all know that with dental implants, we have a much higher bone to implant contact with rough surfaces. And it's extremely important also for biomaterials to look at the surface of each particle of biomaterial and check if the surface is rough. With a very high surface roughness, then we can really osseointegrate our particles of biomaterial. And bone to material contact depends on surface roughness. This is an image of a titanium implant on the lower right part of the image. This is the SLA surface. Next, please. And I think on the next slide, no, it's not a fact, but I will come back to that in a few minutes. With hydroxyapatites, depending on the surface topography, on the surface roughness, we can obtain a totally, depending on the manufacturing process, we can obtain completely different surface topographies. On the left side, we have a non-sintered bovine hydroxyapatite. This is actually the bio-os, very rough. And that is why this material is very osteoconductive. That is why this material is excellent for getting a very high osteoconductivity. It's not excellent for everything, and we will come back to that later on. But for osteoconductivity, this is the best material because it is the roughest material on the market at the moment. In the middle part, we have a sintered bovine hydroxyapatite. Sintered, that means heated above 1000 degrees. And when you heat the material, the bovine hydroxyapatite above 1000 degrees, then we really melt it, and it becomes very soft, very smooth, and yet then you kill the osteoconductivity. And it's the same for synthetic biomaterials, synthetic hydroxyapatites. Most synthetic hydroxyapatites are also sintered and very smooth. Next slide, please. Yeah, does it really have an influence on the bioefficiency of the material? I would like you to have a look at those three materials. Actually, it's the same material. It's our material. And on the left part, it's just after the protein extraction process at the exit of our big and patented reactor to extract the proteins. It's a very rough material, but still not very hard. In the middle, the material has been hardened with a flash treatment at a very precise temperature. It's not sintered, it's just hardened with a flash treatment at 800 degrees. And the same material, when we heat it at 1200 degrees, then we completely melt it and it becomes very smooth, like you can see on the right side of the image. Then we compared those three materials in mini pigs. And what did it give? Next slide, please. What we saw is that with the unsintered hydroxyapatite, so the raw material on the left, we obtained a very high, nearly 80% of bone to material contact. Completely the same level of bone to material contact with the hardened material, which is still very rough. It's a modified surface roughness, but it's still very rough. And when we sinter the material on 1000 degrees, and that's exactly the same material, but just melted, sintered, then we really kill and divide by 2 the bone to material contact. So that means that when we will drill the material, the regenerated area and with this material that has a low bone to material contact, you will obtain a very soft bone. When with the very high bone to material contact, the regenerated tissue will be very dense, which is of course very good for our primary stability of our implants. And that has been published quite recently in Materials by our team. Next slide. So it has a very high influence, and many hydroxyapatites, when we use hydroxyapatites, we have various surface topographies, and this is, for instance, a very renowned material from a renowned company, from Stroman Bottis. This is the Cerabone, and the Cerabone is not only very smooth, but it also contains some dusts that can even have an influence on inflammation, the inflammatory process, that increases the inflammatory process. Next, please. And this is the wishbone material. And the wishbone material is produced with very thin slices of Belgian bovine femurs. The extraction process is done in a soda solution, concentrated soda solution. And you know that soda, perhaps you know that soda is very effective for inactivating prions, those very dangerous proteins. It's not only a soda solution, but it's at very high pressure, 32 bars for 6-7 hours at 230 degrees. Thanks to the pressure, of course, the temperature can be increased very high. Yeah, so high pressure, high temperature in a soda solution for 6-7, sometimes 8 hours. Then the material is totally devoid of proteins. We have a grinding and sieving process. And then we add an additional treatment with hydrogen peroxides for 10 minutes. And then the hardening process, the hardening step at 820 degrees for 30 minutes. That is the safest process with a very optimized topography. You can see on this image, the sister image, that the surface topography is very rough, very structured, and that will, of course, help a lot for the osteoconductivity of our material. Next, please. So if we summarize a little bit what we have on the market, we have the non-sintered bovine hydroxyapatite, for instance, the BioOS. Non-sintered bovine, and I think that the only material on the market is available is the BioOS. It's non-sintered, it's heated only at something like 300 degrees. This material can still contain animal proteins, and that has been published, for instance, by Hassam Nawzari, that this material could still contain some animal proteins. But the topography is just perfect, excellent, okay? With the wishbone material, this material is totally protein-free, thanks to this process that I just described, and the topography, the bioefficiency, is also perfect. The other materials, the other hydroxyapatites on the market, which are the most common, because the simplest way to eliminate the proteins is just to heat the material at 1000 degrees. Then those materials are really protein-free, so very safe, but then the topography is really poor, is really compromised, and the bioefficiency is highly decreased. And that's the problem. So on the market at the moment, what we have is either sintered hydroxyapatites from bovine origin. Then they are very safe, but their bioefficiency is low. And on the other side, we have the non-sintered bovine, that is the BioOS, which is very osteoconductive, nice topography, but not the safest process. Next slide, please, Daniel. In addition to that, we have done a lot of, or many animal studies in big animals, and this is in sheep, and the condyle and proximal humerus of sheep. And that has been done independently by the NAMSA group in the US, actually. And what we saw is that when we filled some artificial sockets with this some materials, we had very impressive results, also either with at 12 weeks, either with BioOS or with the wishbone, the wishbone material, same level at 12 weeks. But what is extremely interesting is that at 4 weeks, we see a very significant difference. That is, the wishbone is much more effective at 4 weeks than BioOS. Okay, strange. Could you repeat that? Yeah, we did repeat that in dogs then. We did then two dog studies. Yeah, next slide, please. Thank you. We did then this is still that's not in dogs. This is still in sheep's, and that is the difference that we have in between BioOS and wishbone at 12 weeks. It's BioOS is excellent, and wishbone, the wishbone material, is also excellent, as you can see on the left side. On the right side, you see at 4 weeks, and at 4 weeks in between BioOS and wishbone, we have a very significant difference. That is, the mineralization in between the particles is significantly higher at wishbone as compared to BioOS. Next slide. Then we did some dog studies, and dog studies that were also done in a GLP study, independent GLP study, in an independent group. And we did premolar extractions and guided bone regeneration. We did actually 2 studies that gave absolutely the same outcomes, but we did 2 studies because 2 studies in dogs, because the first study we stopped the analysis at 12 weeks, which was not really sufficient, that we repeated the study and we then continued the study until 26 weeks, that is 6 months in dogs. And again, what is extremely impressive here is to look at the left side of the graph and see that at 4 weeks, we have nearly the double regeneration with reborn as compared to bio-os. Of course, with bio-os, it's with both materials, it's better than with a sham area without any material or membrane. At 17 weeks and 26 weeks, 12 weeks and 26 weeks, then the bio-os becomes very good. We know it, but we are as good as the bio-os at the 12 and 26 weeks, but we are much faster because at 4 weeks, we have a significantly higher bone regeneration as compared to bio-os. Next slide, please. In terms of bone to material contact, because I told you that it's something that is extremely important and a parameter where the bio-os is best in class, we can say that we are also best in class because we are top level bone to material contact. We are as good as the best in class in terms of bone to material contact, which is absolutely unique. So we are as good as the best in class in terms of bone to material contact, absolutely unique. We obtain the same level of bone regeneration at long term, 12 weeks, 26 weeks, but we are faster because at 4 weeks, we have a significantly higher bone regeneration in our material, bone mineralization in our material, and we have a much safer process to eliminate the proteins as compared to bio-os. And that's a summary, actually. Next slide, please. So this is the first material that is as conductive, osteoconductive as bio-os. The first material available on the market, on the American market, that is as osteoconductive as bio-os. It doesn't exist so far. So as osteoconductive is very good, but we have a much safer process for proteins inactivation. We don't have any remnants of proteins in our material, thanks to the patented process that we have developed. And thanks to some qualities of the material, we also have a faster bone mineralization on our material. And that really means that if I were authorized to use this material in Europe at the moment, I would only use this material for my guided bone regeneration patients. Next slide. That is it. That's what I wanted to share with you. And now, of course, we are, Daniel and myself, ready for all discussions that you would like.
Yeah, before we do, Eric, I was going to ask if you wanted to show the video on the hydrophilic nature of the product.
Yeah, this is very interesting because this material, thanks again to the manufacturing process, is a highly hydrophilic material. I didn't develop all aspects of the qualities and properties of this material, but this material is super hydrophilic. That's very interesting.
Let me share this. Hang on a second. I'll just go back. I just need to go to screen share again. Bear with me 1 second. Lost the thing now. Where's the screen share gone? Bear with me 1 second. Ah, got it. Here we go. Right. Oh.
So you can see that the hydrophilicity of the wee bone is higher than the hydrophilicity of bio-os. Very impressive. Very nice. And it's not just for the image and for fun, for doing nice videos. We know that when a material is highly hydrophilic, it means that it will, better than hydrophobic materials, fixate the adhesive proteins of the blood. And adhesive proteins, of course, will help the adhesion of cells of pre-osteoblasts. And that is, of course, extremely important too, because the blood that will invade our material will really fixate adhesins on the biomaterial, and that will, of course, help tissue regeneration for sure. Perhaps another video with the hydrophilicity again, but also with the handling of the material and opening of the packaging.
Yeah, I've got it. I've got it with the packaging handling. That's not got the.
Yeah, they have the packaging with them. I believe so.
Yeah.
Yo no sé, doctores, no sé, yo creo que a todos recibieron las muestras.
Okay, I'll go back. I'll put this on the screen here now.
Sí. Okay.
That should be there, Eric.
Yeah, that's it. This is the packaging, very simple packaging. Of course, it's a double packaging. We have this double packaging here. Non-sterile, of course, at the outside. So you can just open the first boxing. It's sterile inside. You then drop it on your sterile table, and you can see that we have in the center the material in a vial, in a container that will be helpful for mixing with blood or saline. And we have two lateral pots to stabilize the packaging. Now, this material can be quite electrostatic, so you have to open it like this, very softly, gently, slowly, slow opening, like this, and you will have a very stable packaging on your table, on your tray, on your surgical tray. Then when we add some saline or blood to this material, you can see that it's very hydrophilic. It's immediately wet with this saline or blood. And then when you will handle this material, it will nearly like a paste. It's so hydrophilic that all particles stick together. And you can really manipulate that and place that in the mouth, in the wound, like nearly like a paste. And you will see that the handling of this material is absolutely fantastic here.
I'm just showing it again because it's a nice nice demonstration of how the product behaves.
Yeah, because the handling of the material is one of the most appreciated parameters by the clinicians, I think, Danielle.
Mm-hmm.
That's really impressive. And I have used a lot of this material compared with BioOS in many dog studies, as you have seen. And so I have treated many defects with both materials, and it's really completely different. The handling of the material is really much easier with this material because all particles really stick together, and that's very impressive. You can really use it like a paste. So if you have at the moment the opportunity to test it, some water, some saline on it, and mix it with spatula, I think it's interesting to test that, because we all know that.
Oh, there you go.
Great.
Wonderful.
And you can even reverse your spatula. I think it will stick. Huh? No, it didn't. Not enough water. Add some water, it will work, most probably. But because at the end of the day, the way to the ease of use of the material is of great importance. Of course, I can show you a lot of histo data, scientific data, blah blah blah. But at the end of the day, it has to be very
well
easy.
done.
You see, a bit more water, and then it sticks. Great.
One of the things that we had reported from the feedback of the users in California was that they said once they placed it, they had very little migration of particles, because some patients that had used BioOS and other products found that they would still have loose particles in their mouth, in the days following the surgery. And they said that the patients, even when they used a membrane, even they said that when some of them used the Wishbone product without a membrane, and instead they had very, very little migration of particles, they were very pleased with how it held together. So that was another piece of feedback relating to that.
We've also done a delivery in 3 different types. We've delivered it via a spatula to the site. We've delivered it via open syringe, that they get utility syringes and syringe it in. They've also done amalgam carriers and tried it. So in all 3 different techniques, doctor, depending on the techniques that you use, it turned out very, very nicely. And also to concur with Daniel, when we did the placement in sockets, immediate socket grafting, there was little to no migration. It basically went in like toothpaste and putty. It stayed there. And then they picked an option whether to use membrane or not. Yeah, it had, matter of fact, when we did at the AO, Daniel, we had a great presentation from Dr. Romanos at the table, and he kept bringing the spatula up and showing it stuck like putty.
Yeah, it's really like a putty. Like a putty, yeah. That's very nice to use, yeah.
Now, also, I don't know about in your arena, Jorge, but in the US, most of the doctors use half cc to 1 cc. And more of my DSOs, if you will, are using some of the 2 cc. But again, that's strictly in your market. You can tell me whether or not what you think.
All depends the treatment and the size in the size, but mainly is 0.25, mainly, or 0.5 that's the proportion. Okay, but anyway.
Normally for socket treatment, socket management, 0.25 is just sufficient. Sometimes even for two sockets. Of course, for lateral augmentation, 0.5 grams or 1 gram can be very interesting. And for sinus grafting, 1 gram is perhaps the most interesting.
I would like to open to some questions if they have, doctor, if you allow me.
Of course.
Yo no sé si hay alguna pregunta, doctores, respecto a la presentación. ¿Alguna inquietud? Sí, el doctor Norero está muteado, doctor. Adelante.
Ahora sí. Hi, thank you very much for your presentation, Dr. Rompen. We will try your new material. One question is, can you mix with LPRF instead of water?
Yeah, of course. Of course, you will update this
Sticky bone?
The sticky bone, yeah, absolutely. It works very nicely.
It's better.
That's the video that we have to do, Daniel. It's the sticky bone, like we call it, when we mix the material with LPRF, and that's very interesting because LPRF, just for Daniel and others, will contain some growth factors that can be very helpful for tissues healing. Yeah.
You must do a comparison between with LPRF and with water. You can add very, very faster period of cicatrization, of healing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question.
No sé si hay alguna otra pregunta, doctores, en qué puedo ayudar.
Jorge, what if you don't mind me, Jorge, what we see, Dr. Rampen, some of the KOLs that we put on board that I've asked over in Los Angeles, Dr. Nazari, Dr. JC San, UCLA, and Dr. Peter Carson, UOP. Their questions came up, Jorge, this is probably going to be good for you, is can I mix this with allograft? And what are the percentages that we see that works? Was that canary in the minefield, or what are the response? And I can tell you early stuff that we've done already, Jorge, is Dr. Cisan loves it. He mixes, he tried 50-50, he tried 60-40 and 80-20. And right now he's actually leaning more to not mixing it and keeping WB only. But yes, but Dr. Rampan, you could probably elaborate.
Yeah. We, as you know, that in Europe, we use very few allografts, but I use a lot of bone chips from the patient. That means that when I open my flap, of course, I will very often do some perforations. And of course, when I do some perforations with a little burr, I will keep all bone chips from the patient and mix it with the material. With any material I use, with BioOS, I do that, of course. So what we need is the best biomaterial, and sometimes add some osteopromotive factors, of course, blood or PRF or bone chips. Everything is absolutely interesting. What we have seen is that in the past, we were using a 50-50 mixture, 50% of bone chips, 50% of biomaterial. And we have seen that when we do that, we lose some volume. So we are more now towards 60-40 or 70-30 or even 80-20 in terms of volume to have some promotion, but without losing volume afterwards. That's it.
That's exactly what Dr. Cisan saw. He liked the volume and the space maintained. He liked that, and that's why. Matter of fact, Jorge, to have Dr. Nazari on board with the team is paramount, because the studies he's done with the xenografts, right, Dr. Rampan?
And what I could also add is that I didn't show that in this presentation because the goal is not to criticize some other materials, but there are some papers showing very clearly that with BioOS, and I still believe that in Europe on the market, the BioOS is really a gold standard for me, but we are better than that. With the BioOS, we have a very high osteoconductivity. We have a very good quality of the bone at the end of the regenerative process, but the BioOS will slightly slow down the bone regeneration. And the reason for that is not official, it's not been published, but we have very clear data showing that with BioOS, will fixate a lot of calcium from the blood. So the particles of BioOS fixate a lot of calcium from the blood. And that means that the bone forming cells are devoid of calcium to mineralize. So they are in trouble to mineralize. The bone forming cells are there, but that takes time to mineralize because they don't have calcium enough to mineralize. And that's completely different with the WE bone, with the W bone, our biomaterial, where the level of fixation of calcium from the environment, from the blood around the cells, the level of fixation is lower. So that leaves more calcium and phosphorus available for the bone forming cells. That's most probably the main reason for this difference in terms of speed of mineralization. That is the main explanation we have for explaining that at 4 weeks, we are much more effective than BioOS in terms of bone mineralization. Yeah. So as compared to BioOS, we have two main advantages. Of course, the safety of the extraction, protein extraction process, the safety of the manufacturing process, and the speed of bone regeneration. Yeah.
Alejandra, hi, how are you, Alejandra? I know when we initially talked a couple of months ago, you had some very good questions related to conductivity, and coming from your expertise in that side, do you have any questions that you want to ask Dr. Rampan from that aspect?
Oh, I believe it's perfectly clear, all the presentation. No sé si los doctores tienen alguna pregunta, insisto, nosotros lo que vamos a hacer ahora, sí, por favor, doctor Javier.
Okay. Do you see some different rate in rate resorption compared with BIOS?
It's a very good question too. If we see some difference, it's not in the direction of a faster resorption. It's quite equivalent with BIOS in terms of stability in the wound, and we needed to maintain the volume, as explained earlier. When we add too much of autologous bone chips, for instance, we lose a lot of volume afterwards, because the bone chips will not maintain the volume in the end. So it's not more resorbable than BIOS, and perhaps it could even be a bit more stable on the long term, as based on the data we have at the moment.
You think that is better than BIOS in volume stability?
In terms of volume stability, it's better than BIOS, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Nuestra idea, doctores, es poder compartir con ustedes en los próximos días una caja de Wishbone, para que también si se sienten con la libertad de poder usarlo también en pacientes, porque el que le acabamos de enviar es para testing nada más, es solamente para manejo no clínico. Entonces les vamos a hacer llegar una muestra o un producto final que puedan usar en pacientes también, para que el que quiera hacerlo después pueda compartir con nosotros la experiencia clínica, que sería la idea.
Claro, lo ideal es que después nos digan qué les pareció, cómo les fue, cuáles son los resultados, para que podamos compartirlo entre todos.
Sorry for the Spanish.
Muchas gracias.
We're inviting them to use in the near future, in the couple of days more, we will deliver a true product to use in clinic. So they will try, or they one that you want to, they could try in patients as well.
And we will be very happy, of course. I will personally be very happy, would be very happy to receive your comments on the colleagues on the handling of the material, and of course your perhaps the problems you could have with it, or questions you could have. I would be very interested in receiving your feedback, clinical feedback about the use of the material, of course.
Can I share your contact details, Eric, after this, so everybody has those? Okay, wonderful, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, si no hay ninguna otra pregunta, no sé.
Ahí parece que hay.
Hello, thanks for your presentation. What member do you use with Wishbone?
With membrane?
Yeah.
Oh, I can use several types of membrane. I'm not really keen on one brand of membrane. At the moment, we do not produce or manufacture membrane, because it's completely different area. Biomaterials, filling materials, hydroxyapatite, it's protein-free material. And on the other side, you have a protein material, the collagenous membranes. So I like the Geistlich membrane is quite okay, but I really like I even do prefer the Creus membrane from Nobel, which is more elastic. So this one I like it very much, this membrane, because it's very elastic for the sausage technique. When you really pack your material, you can really increase the volume, and that's very interesting. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, Jorge, are you happy that I think we've again, this is an opportunity to follow on if any questions come later. And I think also once people have experience of using the product, handling it, and it will be interesting to get feedback on what results people see in the follow-up period after the graft placement and then when implants go in. So any information or data that comes from that is all extremely interesting, and obviously Professor Rampon will be very interested to learn what your experience tells you.
Really.
Perfect. Thank
Mhm.
you. Thank you. Well, thank you very much. Doctores, doctores, sí, como les decía, vamos a hacerles llegar muestras para uso clínico, y lo ideal, y el doctor Rampen está abierto, así como Daniel y nosotros también, evidentemente, abierto a cualquier duda, cualquier pregunta, cualquier inquietud que ustedes tengan. Sería extraordinario poder contar con su feedback, con su respuesta o con incluso experiencia clínica que hayan tenido con el producto. Entonces, desde ya les agradecemos su participación. Agradecemos también a Daniel, a Ben, al doctor Rampen por esta presentación, y a ustedes especialmente por colaborar con nosotros en este tiempo y habernos dado estos minutos importantes del mensaje que teníamos para compartir. Así que le agradecemos muchísimo su presencia y esperamos verlos y saber de ustedes muy pronto. Thank you very much, Daniel. Thank you very much, Dr. Rampen, Ben. I share with them that this has been a wonderful experience. We hope to hear from them as soon as they have some questions or some commentaries about the experience with the product in clinics. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Your colleagues. It was great having you online today.
Thank
Thanks.
you very much to you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Jorge, Alejandra.
Gracias.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Chao.
Hey.
Chao.